I get it right, then this whole magic internet money thing is actually going to become real, and I could be at the ground floor of changing the way the world financial system works.
So, I mean, pre-Ethereum, you were with BitShares, right?
Mm-hmm.
You helped out. So tell me about that journey. Tell me about how you got into crypto. Tell me about BitShares. Let's dive into all of that.
Yeah, so pre-crypto, it started in the 1980s with a lot of people. I'm 33, so I was born in the 80s, but I don't remember the 1980s because I was 3 by the time I left. But there are a lot of people in our space who actually do, like Nick Szabo and Wade Dye and Adam Back, and before he died, Hal Finney. And there, people realize, hey, this internet thing, the instantaneous movement of information would infer that it's possible to do the instantaneous movement of value. So we said, if I can send an email, I should be able to have email for money. So why don't I have that? So it was very obvious that there needed to be some sort of payment layer, payment system inside the internet, and some sort of digital money of the internet. And actually, it resurrected all these things of private monies, global currencies, and international reserve currencies. And there's a lot of theory on that. Like there's Murray Rothbard wrote about it, Mises wrote about it. So there was a utopia and an excitement in the 1980s of cypherpunk money, cypherpunk cash, cypherpunk movement of value. Kind of like the early days of AI. In the 1950s, there was all these AI researchers got so excited about the prospect of artificial intelligence, and they had overly optimistic estimates. They said in 1960, 1970, we're going to have robots and computers we can talk to, and like AIs everywhere. And you see great shows like Lost in Space and so forth. And they were prognosticating a world of wonder, and it was the same thing with the cypherpunk movement. They were kind of prognosticating this crypto anarchy, and you have books like Cryptonomicon and so forth. So that all kind of died out, and then in the 90s with the internet boom, it came back through centralized efforts like DigiCash. So what was his name? Yeah, David Chaum was the big guy there. He was a brilliant guy. Interesting ideas, but the problem was that most of the solutions required a middleman to work. So you could get anonymous money, you could get digital money moving, but you needed a central ledger for these things to work. And a lot of people were trying to build their way up to something where they could get rid of the middleman, because they said that, well, we have middleman, what's the point of having this on the internet? It's not decentralized. So then Bitcoin came out in 2009, and it really showed that you actually could run at scale, a reasonable scale, decentralized money. And a lot of the adherents in the early days of Bitcoin were from the internet societies and from the peer-to-peer foundation and for cypherpunks that were kind of leftovers. And they were saying, wow, this is so cool, we actually solved this problem. But it had no value. And so how people actually acquired Bitcoin was they usually mine it, or people just send it to you, and it had no value, so it was basically free. So in 2009, it wasn't inconceivable to ping someone over a message board and say, could you send me 500 Bitcoin? And they'd be like, oh yeah, no problem, oh, here you go. And so I came in 2011, and I started mining, and I set up some really beefy rigs, and I had a bunch of 5850 AMD cards in Crossfire. One set would give you 1.2 gigahash, and remember, it was really cheap at the time, like $4 a Bitcoin. So you're running this thing, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to make like 20, 30 grand running this thing, and I did. And that's like 50,000 Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, okay, this is great. This is so exciting. But then what I started doing is spending them and giving them away and things like that. So I bought an Xbox 360 on this little thing called BitMint, which was like kind of like an eBay for Bitcoin. So you'd find cool shit, and products and services would be listed. And I got an Xbox for 30 Bitcoin. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. This magic internet money bought me this amazing gaming machine. I won't get rid of it now. It's like a $3 million Xbox.
Right.
That's an NFT if I've ever seen one. So like, and also I'd send it to people, sell it to people, and things like that. So quickly that hoard of Bitcoin went away. But it was that was what the early days were like. We loved the philosophy. The meetups were extremely small. My first Bitcoin meetup had 2 people registered, myself and another guy. I showed up, he didn't. So I had a lovely conversation with myself. Little things like that. And I never really took it too seriously. I started getting professionally, though, in the space in 2013, because suddenly after the Cypriot crisis, Bitcoin went to a $1 billion valuation. And I started thinking, and I said, well, if I roll the dice on this, it can go one of 2 ways. It's going to die really quickly in 6 to 12 months, or it's going to grow exponentially, and the next stop is going to be like $100 billion. So I really need to get involved, and worst case scenario, I've wasted a year of my time. But if I get it right, then this whole magic internet money thing is actually going to become real, and I could be at the ground floor of changing the way the world financial system works. You get that like once every century, give or take, usually when an empire collapses. So the last time was the Bretton Woods Accords in 1944. After the back, right when World War II was closing, and before that, it was the Brits lost. The empire started falling apart, and so we moved from the sterling to the dollar. So it's like you don't really, as a regular private Joe, have an opportunity to just come in and suddenly change the nature of money itself and society itself. So I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how to do anything. I studied mathematics, and that's the utterly most useless thing in the world if you want to be a business guy. So I said, here's what I'll do. I'll create a free course teaching people how Bitcoin works and what is money. And I read all these lovely books like The Ascent of Money from Niall Ferguson and Secrets of the Temple, which talked about the history of Federal Reserve. So I read probably 14, 15 books on the nature of money, and I just read the protocol, and I went through the source code. I had a pretty good idea how this works. So I released a class called Bitcoin or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And I released it on Udemy. I was a big Peter Sellers fan, Dr. Strangelove. Yeah, so I released it on Udemy. I figured, okay, I'll get a few students. I ended up getting 70,000 students. Blew my mind.
Is this course still available?
It's still around if you Google it.
Do the Charles Hoskinson 2013 Intro to Bitcoin.
It literally, there's even a slide in the course like, what would happen if Bitcoin ever got to $10 billion or $100 billion of value? It's like $10,000 Bitcoin. That's crazy. Inconceivable. Yeah. Sean Wallace for the win. So anyway, I created a class. I got 5,000 emails, and I met Roger Ver and Eric Voorhees and Andreas Antonopoulos and a lot of other people through it. But one of my students in particular is a guy named Li Xiaolao. He was based in China, and he messaged me and said, hey, I really like your stuff. I'd like to give you some money to start a business. And I'm thinking this is some sort of Nigerian prince scam or something like that. It's like,
just send some money to my account. I'll send it right back.
But he was serious about it. He's like, I'm going to give you $500,000 to go start a business. And I'm like, okay. But sure enough, he was actually legitimate and serious, and so I went to Bitcoin Talk, and I created a little thread. It was called Project Invictus, and it said, what could we do to make Bitcoin crypto undefeatable? What would really solve all of our major problems? And two things came up. It was a bimodal distribution in the responses. One was saying, hey, we need stability because volatility is a really bad deal. And if we don't get stability, merchants won't adopt it. You can't use it for lending. Fair enough. Okay, so you need a stable coin. So early days, there were no stable coins. The other said we need decentralized exchange because at the time Mt. Gox was just starting to crumble and collapse, and people realized the existential problems that your largest exchanges in the ecosystem, a single point of failure could basically bring the price down and destroy the entire economy.